the galaxy's strongest prison. The prison floated in the cold void of space, a fortress unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Built upon the wreckage of a dying star, it was a sprawling labyrinth of reinforced alloys, energy fields, and unbreakable shields. Its architects were the most advanced minds from across dozens of alien civilizations, united in a single purpose: to build a place that could contain the most dangerous beings in existence. They called it the Galactic Mega Prison, a name that carried weight across every star system, for it was not a place of correction or mercy, but a vault for monsters who could not be allowed to walk free. Every corridor was guarded by machines that never slept. Every wall layered with force barriers designed to vaporize anything that tried to pass through. The prison was said to be escape-proof, a place where hope itself was strangled at the airlock, and it was to be the final cage for the galaxy's greatest threat, Deathworlders. The galaxy had always spoken of Deathworlders in hushed tones, for they came from a planet so hostile that even its plants killed. Its storms burned and its animals hunted with relentless hunger. That world was called Earth, and the creatures it produced were called humans. The Council of Wardens who governed the prison believed that humans were too dangerous to be allowed anywhere else. These creatures were survivors who could turn rocks into weapons, who could drink poison and still crawl forward, who could fight even after their bodies were broken. To the Wardens, they were unpredictable, too resourceful, too stubborn to submit to chains. And yet the galaxy believed that this prison would finally be enough to contain them. For if this mega prison could not hold a Deathworlder, then nothing in the universe ever would. The Wardens prepared their fortress for the first shipment. Among them was a towering insectoid commander whose claws clicked with anticipation. He stood before his officers and spoke with confidence. "The humans will arrive today," he declared, "and when they do, the galaxy will finally sleep in peace. We have built walls stronger than neutron stars, shields tighter than black holes, and systems more advanced than any fleet. They will not escape." His officers bowed, each one convinced of his certainty. Outside the great hangar bay, ships began to dock, carrying the prisoners who were to test the prison's purpose. When the humans were marched through the gates, silence fell. They were not like the other prisoners. The other alien captives screamed or fought against their chains, but the humans walked with steady steps, their eyes sharp and calculating. They scanned every corridor, every turret, every sensor embedded in the walls. Their faces betrayed no fear, only curiosity, as if the fortress before them was nothing more than a puzzle waiting to be solved. The alien guards whispered among themselves, unsettled by the calmness of these creatures. The guards had been told humans were beasts, savage things that would howl and rage, yet here they saw men and women with controlled movements, as if they had already begun planning something no one else could see. The prisoners from other worlds watched as the humans were led deeper inside. A reptilian inmate pressed its snout against the bars of its cell and muttered, "Those are the Deathworlders." The insectoid beside him hissed back, "They will rot here like the rest of us." Yet in the dim glow of the corridors, the humans' eyes burned with a light that told a different story. They did not look broken. They did not look defeated. They looked awake, alive, and already thinking. The mega prison was supposed to be unbreakable, but within its walls a new game had already begun, and the humans were playing it from the moment they stepped inside arrival of the humans. The humans were taken through the massive reinforced doors, and deeper into the prison's heart were entire wings stretched across kilometers, and each section was dedicated to a species that required specific containment methods. Acid-breathing serpents had their own cells lined with absorbent plating. Energy-feeding parasites were locked behind fields that starved them of current, and telepathic criminals were trapped within silence chambers that blocked thought itself. Yet the humans were not placed in special cells, for the Wardens had built an entire new block just for them. A block that was said to be the most secure section of the prison, a place where walls were triple layered and the floors were lined with power conductors that could send lethal shocks if anyone dared resist. The alien guards led the humans with a mixture of pride and nervousness, for while they trusted the design of the prison, they could not ignore the reputation of those they marched beside. Among the prisoners was Captain Elias Ward, a soldier who had fought across several war fronts before his capture. His wrists were bound in energy restraints, but his eyes moved ceaselessly across every detail of his surroundings. He counted the number of guards, noted their weapons, and even registered the rhythm of their steps. Behind him was Dr. Lena Havers, a scientist whose sharp mind had designed survival systems back on Earth when resources were scarce. She appeared quiet, almost timid, but her gaze lingered on the energy fields that hummed along the corridor, and she whispered calculations under her breath. There were others too, a mechanic, a medic, even a simple farmer, each one with different skills, yet each carrying the same calm fire in their expressions. None of them appeared afraid, and that unsettled the wardens more than open defiance ever. Could the prison cameras followed their march, broadcasting their arrival to the command hub where the insectoid warden commander clicked his claws with satisfaction. He turned to his officers and reminded them that these humans were the most dangerous species alive, and that any mistake in their containment would not be tolerated. The officers nodded, confident that the reinforced block would crush any hope of escape. But on the prison floor itself, the guards felt a different weight as they escorted the humans to their cells, for they could feel the intensity of their stares as if the humans were peeling apart the walls with their eyes alone once. Inside their new block, the humans were separated into individual cells, but even then they did not shout or curse. They simply stood silently as the energy bars locked into place, and then slowly they began to explore. Captain Ward pressed against the walls, tapping lightly to listen for changes in sound. Dr. Havers crouched near the floor, studying the faint shimmer of current in the conductors. The mechanic named Alvarez leaned back on his bed, his hands moving as if assembling invisible parts, while he studied the bolts and hinges of the security door. The farmer, Marcus, smiled faintly as he ran his hands along the small rations provided, already considering how they could be stretched or altered to serve a different purpose. Each human acted as though this cell was not a cage, but a puzzle. The other prisoners in nearby blocks soon noticed the strange behavior. Aliens of different shapes and voices whispered to one another as they watched through narrow view slots. They had seen countless new arrivals before, most of them broken by despair or raging in futile anger. But these humans were different. They were patient. They were watching. They were learning. One scaled creature muttered to another, "I have seen prisoners who fought against the guards. I have seen prisoners who cried until they were hollow, but never have I seen ones who look like hunters placed inside cages that are too small." The other creature hissed back nervously. Perhaps the galaxy was right to fear them. Hours passed and the guards grew restless, for the humans were too calm. They expected rebellion, resistance, some attempt to test the force fields, but instead, the humans only watched, waited, and shared brief glances with each other. Behind those glances was silent understanding, a wordless agreement that none of the aliens could interpret. What the guards did not realize was that the humans were already working together, forming a map of routines, weaknesses, and opportunities. They were not waiting for freedom to be handed to them. They were planning to take it. And the mega prison, no matter how strong, had already begun to show cracks in its illusion of control. Testing the limits, the first night inside the mega prison was silent except for the low hum of the energy fields and the distant footsteps of guards patrolling the endless corridors. Most prisoners eventually surrendered to sleep, but the humans remained alert, each one quietly measuring the dimensions of their cells, the frequency of the lights, and the strength of the invisible barriers. Captain Elias Ward lay on his bed, with his eyes closed, but his mind was awake and counting the interval between the guard rotations, his breaths matching the rhythm of their movements until he had memorized every sound. In the next cell, Dr. Lena Havers pulled a thread from her prison clothing and let it dangle near the field, watching the way it burned and curled at the edges, whispering numbers under her breath as she calculated how much energy was flowing through the current. Across the hall, Alvarez the mechanic pressed his ear against the wall and smiled faintly when he heard the faint pulse of machinery hidden behind the plating. To him it was the sound of a heart, and he knew every heart had a weakness. The alien guards had been told to expect fury and chaos from humans, yet what unsettled them most was this strange quiet discipline. The humans were not like other prisoners who wasted energy screaming or throwing themselves against the barriers. These Deathworlders observed, they learned, and the longer they remained still, the more dangerous they became. A guard whispered nervously to another as they passed the human block. "Why do they not sleep?" he asked, and the other replied, "Because they are already planning." Yet even these words carried fear, for deep down the guard sensed that the humans were treating this fortress not as a cage but as a challenge, a problem to be solved. By the second cycle, the humans had begun to test their environment with small, subtle actions. Ward stretched as if in boredom, but timed his movement with the passing of a patrol to see if the guards reacted. Havers requested water and watched carefully as the automated system extended a tube through the barrier, noting the mechanism's delay and the hiss of pressure when the seal broke. Alvarez disassembled his meager food tray not to eat from it, but to study its composition, pressing the metal lightly against the floor to gauge whether it carried current. Even Marcus the farmer played his role, tossing crumbs to attract the small cleaning drones that scuttled through the halls, smiling when he saw that the drones followed a predictable route that no one else had noticed. Piece by piece they were gathering knowledge, and knowledge was the one weapon the wardens could never confiscate. In the blocks nearby, alien prisoners began to whisper in awe. They had never seen anyone treat the mega-prison with such casual defiance. To most it was a graveyard of hope, a place where the strongest species had been broken, yet these humans behaved as though the walls were made of paper. A scaled prisoner leaned against his bars and muttered to his cellmate, "They are already preparing to leave." The cellmate, a feathered creature with trembling wings, shook its head in disbelief and replied, "No one can escape this place." But even as it spoke the words, it felt a shiver, for the human's calmness was infectious, a quiet storm that made other prisoners believe the impossible might be within reach. On the command deck, the warden commander studied the surveillance feeds, with his many eyes narrowing in suspicion. He saw no outbursts, no aggression, only silence, yet it was a silence that unsettled him more than violence ever could. He clicked his claws against the console and instructed his officers to increase the patrol frequency around the human block, though he assured himself that no true danger existed. After all, the prison was perfect. Every system checked and rechecked, every barrier reinforced. Still a doubt crept through his mind, because perfection was an illusion, and Deathworlders had built their reputation by shattering illusions. The commander reminded himself that this was only the beginning, and that tomorrow would be the true test. Yet deep inside, he feared that the humans had already begun a test of their own. In their cells, the humans exchanged no words, for they did not need them. A glance, a nod, a small gesture was enough to carry meaning. They had already mapped guard patterns, identified weak points, and shared silent conclusions. To the galaxy, the mega-prison was the strongest fortress ever built, but to the humans it was only a puzzle, and puzzles existed to be solved. The breakout begins. The third cycle within the mega-prison began as it always did, with the distant thrum of power grids humming through the walls and the mechanical voices of patrol drones echoing through the endless corridors. To the alien guards it was another ordinary shift, but to the humans it was the moment they had been waiting for. They had spent every hour studying the smallest details, and now the quiet understanding that bound them together turned into action. Captain Elias Ward sat on the edge of his bed with his head lowered like a defeated man, but behind his stillness his mind counted down the seconds until the guard patrol passed. When the footsteps faded into silence, he rose with sudden precision and tapped twice against the wall of his cell, a signal so soft no guard would hear, but every human within earshot would understand. Dr. Lena Havers was the first to respond. She had gathered fragments of her food tray during the previous cycle and pressed them into the floor where the energy currents shimmered faintly. With careful timing, she placed pressure on the weak point she had calculated and watched as the current flickered for only a breath of a second. It was not enough to shut down the field, but it was enough to reveal that the flow could be disrupted. Alvarez took his turn next. The mechanic had studied the drones that delivered rations and knew they followed programmed lines along the floor. As one passed his cell, he reached through the barrier just far enough to snatch at the small panel on its surface and wrench it free. Sparks flew and the drone twitched violently before collapsing in a shower of smoke. The guards monitoring the feeds dismissed it as a mechanical fault, unaware that Alvarez now had a piece of advanced circuitry hidden in his palm. The farmer Marcus played his part by luring the cleaning drones into a corner with the crumbs he had saved. Once close enough, he crushed one underfoot and pulled out the rotating blade it carried for cutting debris. To the aliens, it was a harmless tool, but to him, it was a weapon sharp enough to cut and strong enough to pry. Piece by piece, each human gathered what they needed until the entire block was alive with silent preparation. None of them spoke aloud, yet every glance carried meaning, and every movement was part of a rhythm. Only they understood. The other prisoners watched with wide eyes as the humans began weaving chaos from scraps, and whispers spread like wildfire through the prison wings. "The Deathworlders are moving," they murmured, and the fear in their voices carried both terror and awe. When the signal finally came, it was sudden and unstoppable. Ward timed his strike with the precise moment 2 patrol guards crossed paths outside, the block creating a blind spot in the surveillance network. Havers jammed the power flow of her cell, causing the barrier to flicker weakly. Alvarez forced the stolen circuit against the locking mechanism, and sparks erupted as the door released with a sharp hiss. In an instant, the humans burst free, their bodies moving with the precision of predators unleashed. Alvarez threw himself onto a guard and disarmed him before the alien had even realized what had happened. Marcus swung the improvised blade with terrifying strength, forcing another guard to collapse to the ground clutching a wound. Ward seized a weapon and turned it on the surveillance drones, blasting them into silence. What the galaxy had believed impossible was unfolding in the blink of an eye. The alarm screamed through the corridors and the command hub exploded into chaos as red lights flashed across every console. The insectoid commander stared in disbelief at the feeds that showed humans spilling out of their cells like shadows, cutting through the guards. He barked orders for reinforcements, but his voice betrayed his fear. This was not rebellion, this was not desperation. This was a plan executed with such ruthless precision that it felt like an invasion force striking from within. The prison that was supposed to stand forever had been breached in less than a day, and the Deathworlders were proving that no wall, no barrier, no weapon could hold them. As the humans advanced, they freed more of their own, and in some cases, even released alien prisoners who swore loyalty in exchange for freedom. The mega prison that had been built as the symbol of control was becoming a battlefield of chaos, and at the center of it all, humanity moved with relentless unity. The breakout had begun, and the galaxy was about to learn the cost of underestimating. A Deathworlder, the galaxy in shock. The alarms of the mega prison roared through the void, and signals of emergency raced across the galaxy faster than light itself. From the first instant the humans broke free, every monitoring system linked to the prison relayed the chaos to the distant command stations of dozens of species. Screens lit up with impossible images of humans tearing through security ranks with stolen weapons and improvised tools. At first, many believed it was a mistake in the data, a false alarm triggered by a malfunction. For how could a group of chained prisoners bring down the fortress that had cost entire star systems wealth to build? Yet as the minutes passed, the truth spread and disbelief turned into fear. The unbreakable prison had been breached in less than a single cycle, and the culprits were Deathworlders. In the chamber of the Galactic Council, delegates gathered in panic as the feeds continued to play. The insectoid commander, who had sworn the humans would never escape, stood before them humiliated, his claws trembling as he tried to explain. He insisted the design was flawless, that no species could have prepared for such relentless ingenuity. But his words were drowned beneath the angry voices of the counselors. Some demanded immediate execution of every human on site. Others argued that extermination was the only option, while a few remained silent with the heavy realization that such actions would only invite greater retaliation. The council had long feared humans, but now that fear had become reality. If they could not be held by the most powerful prison ever built, then nothing in the galaxy was safe from their reach, back within the prison itself. The humans advanced through one block after another. Alvarez led a squad of freed prisoners using the circuits and components he had gathered to override doors and confuse the automated defenses. Havers directed groups into cover, her mind calculating angles and timing with clinical precision so that every step of the humans cut through resistance like a blade through cloth. Ward carried a stolen rifle and barked orders with the voice of a seasoned commander, his words carrying weight even among alien prisoners who had never taken orders from a human before. Marcus remained close behind, guiding those too weak to fight, and even offering water or rations to those who staggered. It was not only their ferocity that stunned the other captives, but their unity. The humans fought like predators, but they also protected like guardians, creating a balance that no one else in the prison had ever seen. Whispers turned into chants among the alien prisoners as the humans pressed forward. Some shouted for freedom, others for vengeance, but all knew it was the Deathworlders who had made this moment possible. The very species that had been feared as monsters were now seen as liberators, and though many trembled in awe, they followed gladly because, for the first time, the walls that had suffocated them seemed breakable. The humans became symbols of hope and terror at once. Creatures who could turn despair into fire and ignite rebellion with nothing more than their will in the galaxy beyond. News of the breakout spread faster than officials could contain it. Entire worlds panicked at the thought of humans walking free again. Merchants spoke of convoys rerouting to avoid human contact. Governors ordered fleets to tighten defenses, and children on distant planets whispered bedtime tales not of ghosts, but of humans who could slip through walls and tear down entire fortresses. Fear swept across civilizations like a storm, but hidden beneath that fear was something else, a reluctant admiration. For in the darkest corners of space, some species who had been oppressed for centuries saw in humanity not monsters but proof that no chain could last forever. The council tried to issue statements of control, assuring their people that reinforcements were on the way and that the humans would soon be subdued. Yet even as those words were spoken, the feeds showed a different truth. Guards lay scattered, defenses crumbled, and the humans moved with unstoppable determination. It was no longer a question of whether the prison would fall. The only question left was what the humans would do once they stood outside its walls. The galaxy trembled, not because a prison had been breached, but because the illusion of control had shattered. The Deathworlders had risen once more, and the galaxy realized with dread that there was no prison strong enough to contain them, allies and enemies. The humans pushed deeper into the prison corridors, their steps heavy and unrelenting, their eyes sharp with focus. Behind them poured streams of freed prisoners, some stumbling with disbelief, others roaring with long-suppressed rage. Yet not every alien looked at the humans as saviors. Some followed out of desperation, clinging to the chance of escape, while others watched with growing fear, whispering to themselves that the Deathworlders were too dangerous to trust. The prison had become a battlefield not only of chains and weapons but of hearts and loyalties, and it was here that the humans revealed the truth of their nature. Captain Elias Ward knew they needed allies to escape fully, and so he spoke with authority that cut through the noise. "Any who wish for freedom, stand with us," he shouted, "but know this, we do not abandon those who walk beside us." His voice echoed through the block, carrying a promise that few had ever heard before. Many aliens who had been betrayed by their own kind felt the weight of those words and stepped closer, swearing themselves to the humans. Others hung back, their eyes filled with suspicion, muttering that humans were devils in disguise who would one day turn on everyone else. The air thickened with tension as the line between friend and foe blurred. Dr. Lena Havers used her calm tone to reach those who hesitated. She explained how their plan worked, how they needed every skill and every pair of hands to break the last layers of defense. She spoke not with arrogance but with reason, showing a side of humanity the prisoners had not expected. To her, even the weakest alien carried knowledge worth valuing. Slowly, some of the doubtful ones began to lean forward, swayed by the unexpected compassion of a Deathworlder. Still, a few snarled with hatred, vowing that once the gates were open they would strike at the humans first. The shadows of both hope and treachery traveled with them as they advanced. Alvarez, ever the mechanic, found himself surrounded by insectoid prisoners who had once been engineers for their species' fleets. They watched with awe as he bent wires and forced circuits to obey his will, and he invited them to join his work. For the first time in years, they used their hands not for labor imposed by guards, but for creation, and they felt the strange spark of pride returning. To them, the human was not a monster but a craftsman who respected their skill, and that respect bound them together tighter than chains ever could. Marcus, meanwhile, walked with the weaker captives, steadying those who limped, sharing the little rations he had saved. In his kindness, many aliens saw what they could not understand. How could a species feared as predators choose to share food with strangers? Their fear cracked, replaced with cautious trust. Still, not all prisoners could be swayed. Among the chaos rose voices of betrayal. A group of reptilian inmates whispered plans to alert the wardens in exchange for reward, convinced that the humans would lead them only to destruction. Yet when one of them slipped away to signal the guards, Ward intercepted him with the speed of a hawk. He pinned the traitor against the wall, his weapon pressed coldly against its chest, and he spoke in a voice like stone. "Choose wisely," he warned, "for betrayal means death, but loyalty means freedom." The reptilian trembled, its scales shivering, and at last it lowered its eyes in silence. The message was clear to all who saw. Humanity would forgive doubt but not treachery. As the struggle unfolded, the alien guards rallied in desperation, unleashing waves of reinforcements to block the uprising. Blaster fire streaked across the corridors and screams filled the air. In the chaos, it was the unity of humans and their chosen allies that held the line. Alvarez and the insectoid engineers overrode defense turrets and turned them against the guards. Havers directed formations that shielded the weak behind stronger fighters. Ward charged forward like a storm, cutting through resistance with a fury that inspired courage and dread at once. Even Marcus, carrying only a makeshift blade, fought beside a towering avian prisoner, striking with a strength born of conviction. The prison was tearing itself apart from within, and the humans stood at the center as both heroes and devils, loved and feared in equal measure. To some, they were liberators who gave back hope. To others, they were predators who reminded them of nightmares. Yet whether friend or enemy, no one could deny the truth. Humanity had forced the galaxy to choose. Stand with them or against them, but never again ignore them. The final escape and message. The mega-prison shook with the sound of battle as alarms screamed across every level, and the walls that had once seemed eternal began to fall apart piece by piece. The humans and their allies pushed forward through the storm of blaster fire, every step driven not only by the desire for freedom but by the burning will to show the galaxy that no chain could bind them. Captain Elias Ward led the way with relentless focus, his voice carrying commands that turned scattered prisoners into an organized force. Dr. Lena Havers guided groups through collapsing corridors, with calculations that predicted enemy movements before they arrived. Alvarez and the insectoid engineers worked together with impossible speed, forcing systems to overload and redirecting power to create safe paths. Marcus carried the wounded and steadied those who faltered, his strength and kindness a beacon. To those who doubted as they neared the outer hangars, resistance grew desperate. Entire squads of alien guards blocked the way, their weapons blazing with deadly precision. Yet the humans pressed on, their bodies driven beyond exhaustion, their eyes burning with the fire of survivors who refused to bow. The prisoners who had once feared them now fought shoulder to shoulder, inspired by the humans' refusal to surrender. Blaster bolts tore the air, but Alvarez rigged doors to collapse on the guards, cutting off their advance. Havers timed every movement so allies ducked at the exact moment bolts would have struck. Ward cut through the enemy with brutal efficiency, his presence like a storm that none could withstand. Marcus, his makeshift blade stained with battle, carried a fallen avian prisoner on his back, refusing to leave anyone behind. Their unity was no longer just human. It was something larger, a bond between those who refused to live in chains. At last they reached the great hangar bay where ships were stored for emergency transfers. The doors were locked by codes thought unbreakable, but Alvarez and his new allies set to work. Sparks flew as he forced circuits into submission, guided by the insectoids whose clawed hands moved with practiced speed. Havers calculated the sequence of power surges, shouting corrections over the roar of blasters. Ward and Marcus held the line against waves of guards who threw themselves forward in desperation. With one final surge, the door groaned and split apart, revealing the dark expanse of the hangar beyond and the ships that could carry them to freedom. The prisoners surged forward, their voices rising in a roar of triumph. Yet before they boarded, Ward raised his hand and turned back to the security cameras that still flickered from the walls. He knew the entire galaxy was watching. He stepped into the glow of the feed, his weapon lowered but his stance unshaken, and he spoke with the weight of all humanity behind him. "You thought you could cage us, You thought walls and chains would hold us, but you cannot cage Deathworlders. You cannot cage humanity." His words echoed through every transmission and carried across star systems like thunder. In that single moment, the galaxy felt both fear and awe greater than ever before. The humans boarded the stolen ships with their allies, and engines roared to life. As they lifted from the hangar, the prison crumbled in flames behind them. The fortress, that had been built as a symbol of control, reduced to ruins in less than a day. The escape was complete, and the legend of Deathworlders spread like wildfire through the stars. Some civilizations trembled in terror, vowing to build stronger walls, while others whispered with hope that perhaps humanity was not a curse, but a sign that freedom was always possible. No matter what side they stood on, the galaxy would never forget the day the mega prison fell. The humans and their allies vanished into the void, their ships streaking into the darkness, leaving behind nothing but wreckage and a message burned into history. The galaxy had learned the lesson it had long feared to face. Humanity could not be broken, could not be chained, and could not be forgotten. They were Deathworlders, and they had proven it beyond doubt. The final escape and message, unique version. The mega prison was burning from within, and the air was filled with smoke and the cries of both guards and prisoners as the humans and those who had chosen to follow them fought their way to the final gates. The structure that had been called the unbreakable fortress of the galaxy now trembled like a dying beast, and every corridor echoed with the sound of collapse. Captain Elias Ward pressed forward through the chaos with the weight of countless eyes upon him. His body was battered, his uniform torn, yet his spirit burned brighter than the flames that spread across the prison. Dr. Lena Havers carried the knowledge of every calculation she had made, each one a step that brought them closer to survival. Alvarez's hands were blackened with soot and sparks, yet he smiled as he forced alien machines to obey, his mind bending technology to his will. Marcus carried the injured on his back, his arms shaking from the strain. But his heart never faltered as he whispered words of hope to those who could no longer walk. At the gates of the hangar, the final line of guards stood in formation, desperate and afraid, their weapons raised in trembling claws and hands. They shouted commands to halt, but the humans did not stop. With a roar that shook the walls, Ward led the charge, and the line shattered like glass under the weight of unstoppable determination. The guards fell one by one, not because they lacked weapons, but because they lacked the will to stand against something greater than themselves. The prisoners surged behind the humans like a tide, and at last they reached the ships waiting within the cavernous hangar. The ships gleamed under the glow of firelight, vessels meant to transfer prisoners or supply the fortress, and now they became symbols of freedom before boarding. Ward turned toward the nearest surveillance device, still flickering with static. He knew the galaxy was watching, and he knew silence would never be enough. His voice rang out through every channel, steady and unbroken. "You built this place because you feared us. You built these walls because you thought you could control us. You were wrong. You cannot cage Deathworlders. You cannot cage humanity." His words cut through the chaos and carried into every council chamber, every station, every home across the stars. To some it was a message of terror. To others it was a spark of hope. But to all it was a truth that could never again be denied. The humans boarded the ships, and engines roared like thunder as fire consumed the fortress behind them. The mega prison, once a monument to control and fear, was reduced to rubble in less than a single day. Across the galaxy, millions trembled, some swearing to prepare stronger defenses, others whispering prayers of thanks for the courage that had been shown. The legend of Deathworlders spread farther than chains ever could, carried not by fear alone but by the undeniable knowledge that no force in the universe could hold them. As the ships vanished into the endless dark of space, the prison collapsed into silence, leaving only smoke and the echo of words that would live forever. Humanity was free. Humanity was unbroken. Humanity was eternal, the end